Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us tonight with the CFN Community and AAPI Group. Tonight, we have 4 candidates for Needham Select Board and also School Committee. They are Rebecca, Liz for School Committee election, and Lakshmi and Marcus for Select Board. Okay, so the agenda tonight is very tight. We have a list of good questions for the candidates, and also if you have any candidates questions, feel free to ask in the chat box. We'll try to answer them toward the end of the session after the pre-screening questions. And so the agenda tonight is we're going to we'll go around of a short brief self-introduction and then go through the questions. For the self-introduction, probably please limit it to about like 1 minute max. And for questions, please limit it to 2.5 minutes max. So I will try to control the time as much as I can, depending on how it goes. And so first of all, my name is Dennis. I have been living in Needham for 6 years now. I've been very happy. I have 2 kids and going to public school in Needham. Have a lot of good memories and time in the town of Needham. Going forward, we definitely like to work with the current management in the town and the future management of the town and schools, and to make a better place to live and for everybody, including all kinds, including diverse culture communities in this town. So I'll pass this to Rebecca. And do you want to start self-introduction?
Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to just get to introduce myself. And Gary, thank you for originally, connecting me to all you guys. So I've also lived, Dennis, in Needham for 6 years. I also have 2 kids. They are 6 and 10. And I've been getting more involved with town leadership over the last year. I think I'll talk a little bit more about that later, with town meeting, with an organization called Equal Justice Needham, and just getting really interested in and wanting to lean into how we run this town. Previously I didn't really know a lot about, a few years ago, how we run our town. And I think a lot of people don't know that, but the more I've gotten involved, the more I realized that we really have the ability here to shape decisions that kind of affect our everyday lives. And for me, the schools are particularly important, partly because of, my kids and my personal experiences with my kids, and also because of the importance of innovation and data and equity opportunities that we have in the schools that kind of relate to my personal story, which I know we're getting to those questions. So I will get to them when we get to them, but I'm really happy to be here. Dennis, you're on mute.
Hi, everybody. I'm Liz. I see some familiar names in the audience, so I'm excited to be here tonight. I'm a mom to 3. My youngest is a 5th grader at Williams. I have a 10th grader at the high school, and my oldest is actually in her 1st year of college. I've been a resident of Needham for about 15 years now. My husband and I actually originally moved from California, so we're happy to be here. I guess in my minute, I'll just say that I'm a longtime educator. I'm really passionate about education. I've been a classroom teacher. I've also designed my own programs, and I have gone back to school myself recently to do research on the intersection between family, schools, and communities, especially with regards to equity. I've also been really active within Needham as a volunteer, especially in education and families, Parent Talk, Needham Educational Foundation, Citizens for Needham Schools. So at any rate, education, kids, learning, teaching, that's my area of passion. Thanks.
So Lakshmi, next.
Thank you, Dennis, and thank you all of you for tonight. It's a real pleasure to be here. My name is Lakshmi Balachandra, and I am a candidate for Select Board in Needham. And I actually grew up in Needham. I moved back to Needham about 7 years ago, and I have 3 kids. They're 9, 7, and 6, and they're all at Broadmeadow. And the reason I say it's particularly a pleasure to be with this community is that when I was growing up in Needham, there were very few Asian families in town. And I, in fact, was the only Indian girl in the school system when I was growing up in this town. So, you know, it's remarkable how the community has changed, and in just such a wonderful way. And similar to Rebecca, I started getting involved in the town. Pretty much it was driven from frustration. And so now I'm a town meeting member, and the frustration I've been feeling with lots of aspects of town have also driven me to want to run for a leadership role. And that is because I moved back to Needham to raise my family here, which is it's a wonderful community, but I'm also a professor of entrepreneurship at Babson College. And part of my research looks at equity differences. I study how investors make decisions and, frankly, the gender gap in funding. And so one of the big realities that I have learned in my research is that representation really matters. And if you don't have, you know, women, minorities, like voices at the table, then your interests honestly just can't be met. So I really feel a passion for, you know, making sure that a diverse coalition can be represented, and which is what brought me to deciding to throw my hat in the ring and try to win a seat on the select board.
Great. Marcus?
Yes, thank you, Lakshmi, and thank you, Dennis, and thank you for hosting us tonight. I don't have any children, but I've had the privilege to help, you know, coach and help raise children in a sense over the past 7 years. I've been able to interact with thousands of kids that are not particularly mine, but it's been amazing to see them grow and become, you know, older and more involved in the communities that they serve in, whether it's when they would volunteer for me or hire them for jobs or go to see them in their sports programs and things like that. So I've had a really good, I've had a really amazing experience here in Needham, and I've been able to build some really lifelong connections. And my whole life and my kind of like my missions work, my life's work has been to serve people, has been to unite people, has been using what the town has given me in my roles in the nonprofit world, and using that to better programs that I'm running. But also, I think it's so important to get feedback from the people that you serve. And I think that's another reason, other than a little bit of frustration and how kind of Lakshmi ended her introduction about representation. I think it's extremely important for us to get a diverse voice, perspective, and kind of community to help make decisions that are going to push our town forward in many different aspects, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But I couldn't be more excited to be running and to be on the ballot. And I just think this is just an amazing opportunity to be a part of the change that Needham that's been long overdue in Needham. And I'm excited to see what we can do going forward.
Okay, great. Thanks, Marcus. So I think everybody got amazing background experiences in the future role you are going to be you are thinking to run. And without further ado, I will start to go through the pre-screening questions. And a disclaimer for CFN right now is like, first of all, CFN has no endorsement of any candidate for tonight. And also we provide the same pre-screening questions to other candidates who cannot be added to this event this time. We do had another session with Mr. Mo Handel earlier to share his perspective with the CFN group too. And later on, and for all the candidates who provided written answers on the questions, we'll share that equally with the CFN group and the AAPI community. Okay, so the first questions. This is a question, general staging question. And for who joined late, if you can, please mute yourself.
I want the same thing as yours. I'm not.
All right, thank you very much. Now, so the first one is a staging question and for everybody. So what are the top 3 priorities that you plan to address if you are selected as a member of future school committee or select board? Okay, so this time I will maybe run the order backwards. I'll start with Marcus, if you're okay with it.
Of course, I'm okay with it. Thank you for asking. So I think first and foremost, what I've been hearing as I've been, engaging the town over the last few months, just years, and talking to the town about, what they appreciate about the town and coming from different residents. There's been kind of a lack of transparency when it comes to what we're doing and how we're doing things, and then communication as far as, where we're gathering that information, where we're telling people about things that are happening, how we're getting the town engaged and involved. And how I plan to address that is really having, data-driven surveys, focus groups. I think about, better social media just from us as town officials, our town's PSAs, the website. I know someone was hired to kind of maintain the website and make that a little bit better, but because of what happened with COVID, I know that may have sidetracked things a little bit, and I understand. I think about monthly town halls. I think that'd be really important to kind of gauge the interest of the town and the voice of the town, because it's going to change and we can't go by data that we got 7 years ago, 5 years ago. I think we need to keep up with what's happening in the town and keep our pulse on that. I think about helping small businesses. I think about, how COVID has so affected each and every one of us in some way, whether it's a small business, whether it's our homes, whether it's rent, whether it's things like that. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And we hit on, I think there's a question later that we'll talk about as well. And then the last thing I wanted to talk about was improving racial and social justice initiatives and making Needham safe, and prosperous for everyone involved. And I come from a perspective that I've been in Needham, 7 years working or living. I've most of the time been the only person of color in a lot of rooms that I've been in. So to bring that perspective and talk about things that I've experienced, that I know other people have experienced, that haven't been able to have their voices heard, to have their opinions, thought out and put into actions, and they're not being asked the questions of how your valued life, your life experience, your lived experience can help bring about a change that we can all help adopt and be a part of. So I think working with local groups that are already doing this work and bringing more voices to the table. And myself, I'm a part of the Human Rights Committee. I was appointed to that committee, and then also the New RE Working Group, which I was appointed to as well. And I'll talk a little bit about that more later, but I think it's really important that if we're gonna, New RE stands for Needham Unites Against Racism Initiative, for those that don't know. And we've been tasked with giving recommendations to the select board, creating a vision statement and guiding principles for the town to adapt and its various entities in order to help build upon or bring about racial equity and social justice in all aspects. So those are 3 of the things that come to top of mind that I would love to focus on, among other things as well. But thank you.
Great. The time control is almost perfect. So I'll move on to Lakshmi.
Great, thank you so much. So in terms of what my priorities are, I think you'll hear a lot of echo to what Marcus just talked about, because I am very much in agreement that these are clear priorities for our town. And I'll start where he ended in terms of racial and social justice. But for me, what that means is really the need for inclusiveness in leadership. And I already mentioned that this is what my research has really focused on, and where I think this is particularly critical at this juncture is the fact that our select board currently has 5 members, and there are 2 seats open this year. Up until this year, the 5 members have been 1 woman and 4 men who are all white and who have a combined 80+ years of service across the 5 members. And our town is 52% women currently. And there is no one on the select board who has young children or who has, those needs, frankly, at this current moment. And the other side of this is, you may hear people talk about identity politics, but the reality is identity politics are really important, and it's a way to diminish people of their interests when you frame it as, it's about your identity, because the reality is for too long, the identity is default to the majority. And so they're overrepresented with this, frankly, this white male perspective. So that's one in terms of like inclusivity. I also think, just like Marcus was saying, there has been very little communication, but more importantly, very little engagement from our leadership with the town. So the story I like to tell is, my parents, I grew up here, they lived here for 35 years. My mother had started a business in town. She had a retail, like the kids' gift store. It was called Peacock Feather. For those of you that have been here for a while, you may recall it. And, not once was she asked as a business owner, how can the town help her or what needs she might have? And not once have we been asked, right? I moved to this town and I didn't even receive any information as to where, or how to navigate the town operations, how to pay your taxes. I mean, even the simple things, and when I moved to other communities, you get like a welcome package, you get information. So there's none of that here. And I think that needs to change. And the final thing I will say is I completely agree, and I'm going to build on what Marcus said with transparency, but that is also transparency. I'm going to kind of translate that into another avenue to really understand what our town is already investing in and how it currently operates. So Rebecca, I know we'll touch on this more, but Rebecca and I were part of a group with Equal Justice in Needham to investigate what the police operations have been. And we actually started looking at that because of the funding expenses that came up at last town meeting. And then we had, this abuse, frankly, by our local police of Mr. Marvin Henry. And this, then they did a whole investigation, but there are no reports currently of what our police do. Rebecca actually is the one who did all the data analysis to compile to understand what the police do. And so these are things that we need to have a better reporting. We need to have a better understanding on. And there's no communication, like there's no awareness of what we're doing and how we're operating. And in fact, one of the select board members just told me today that apparently my frustrations with having to call different places is all because I didn't call this person. I just needed one phone call. And to me, that illustrates what's wrong with the town, not the fact that, one person knows how to do everything. That's a problem. This should be open to more people and communicated to more people. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm going to ask the same questions for the two candidates for school committee, Liz and Rebecca. Do you want to start, Liz?
All right, so my priorities for schools, the obvious one that is kind of underway is what's happening with COVID. So the school system is in the process of bringing all students back. And if I were elected, I would, of course, support that process to continue. I suspect that there will also be other COVID-related issues that come to light. I hope I'm wrong about that, but COVID will remain, I think, on our radar as a priority for the next year or so. Hopefully, though, eventually we will go beyond COVID. And my other priorities include community and communication, equity in education, and 21st century learning. And I'll just describe each really quickly. I have talked to parents this past spring at great depth, but also through the work that I've done in town. I come into contact with parents on the ground a lot. Some of you may have actually even volunteered with my engineering program, Let's Build. And one thing that I hear repeatedly is that there's sort of a blank when it comes to how the school system works and how decisions are made. And so a lot like Marcus, I have thought to have what I'm calling, he calls them town halls, I call them office hours because I'm also a professor. I work at Leslie. and I have office hours with my students. It's a great opportunity to answer questions, to hear about concerns, and sometimes just to build relationships. So I had had this idea of having office hours regularly as well for members of the community to be able to talk about what's going on for them, or even to just come and chat. And I'll go more into this topic later because community and communication has a lot to do with equity, which is, like Lakshmi, a central part of my own research, but I'll save that for later. Equity in education, I believe this is like the human rights issue of our time, and I have a lot to say on this subject. My goal is to move equity forward in the schools. The schools have already taken some steps to become more equitable. They have taken a stance that they want Needham to be anti-racist schools, which I think is fantastic. But now the question is, how do we move it forward more quickly? How do we deepen that practice? And how do we make sure that representation within equity meets the needs of all residents, all students of Needham? And my last one is 21st century learning. I've spent a lot of time with this since I'm in education, but our school system is based on the system that was developed in the 1880s, and it really hasn't changed that much. I would bring my background to make this pivot, which Needham has started, but I want to continue this pivot into the skills that are actually needed for our modern world, which are not the same thing that was needed 50 years ago. And that is a sort of another separate educational passion of mine. Okay, I think that's it. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Yes, thank you. So being the fourth person to speak, I feel obligated to say you will hear some similar themes, but that's by design. So the four of us, on this call today, we do have a lot of similarities because if I may, I think that what we share in common is a belief that identifying opportunity for improvement is a good thing. Seeing how I'm not a status quo kind of person, and I see that as a really positive thing, because seeing where there's a gap in our town between our vision for the town and what it is on the ground is just, it's just a beautiful thing, so that we can kind of become more and more what we want to be and our vision. And I think that there's a lot of people in this town who are becoming more civically involved, more, attending more school committee meetings, for example, because Zoom makes things so accessible, and really seeing that we do want to kind of move in a direction that is part of like the zeitgeist of kind of everything that's going on in the broader world. So I just wanted to say that in case you're like, why are they all saying the same thing? So some of the priorities that I wanted to highlight, I agree with the COVID recovery point that Liz made. I have a healthcare background, and I'm very excited about what things I think are going to look like over the coming months. But absolutely, COVID is going to continue to be an issue from a health perspective, and also from a mental health perspective, which I think is very important that we highlight and take very seriously. And there's been a lot of parents bringing this issue up on school committee meetings. And I think us figuring out budgetarily how we're going to address those sorts of needs are going to be very important. Which brings me to the second point I wanted to highlight around what I'm calling budget effectiveness. So my background is in healthcare strategy and innovation in corporate environments. And, budget is everything about what you care about. What you fund is what you value. And it's so challenging with, the schools being the biggest budget for Needham, and so many things and so many constituencies that we have to serve. And there's always programs that people want to do that are challenging to do for budget reasons, equity programs, mental health programs, and so forth. And so one of the things that'll be important to me is just to make sure really that all of our spending is leading to the outcomes that we want in an efficient kind of way. And if not, kind of where do we adjust? An example that I've seen that perhaps special education may have some opportunities where we could better serve the needs of kids in a way that might be financially more efficient. And and that doesn't mean we're funding that less. That means we're funding that, more essentially. But I think that my business lens kind of can serve us there. So our tax dollars, frankly, can go further. And the third area that I wanted to highlight, which I know we'll talk more about, is equity issues. And the two things that I wanted to highlight there, for me, it's about data and it's about urgency. There's been great, work done with, for example, the audit, the equity audit that was done a few years ago. And I think the questions here are we implementing those implications, fully and quickly? This idea of urgency is one that I've heard from a lot of people. And, again, there's sort of that data question and that transparency question of what are we doing? What are we not doing and for what reasons? What would it take? All those kinds of things. And I think there's a lot of tangible areas such as our early childhood anti-racism education, which is starting to be implemented, which is very exciting. I have a kindergartner. So, I can see that starting. Also our history curriculum, which is something that was brought up at the event a couple of weeks ago by those amazing high school students. How do we look at our history curriculum? So, making sure that we accelerate, our timelines for looking at all those types of things.
Okay, thank you. I think there's multiple priorities for going forward for both the town and also school system in Needham. And I think every candidate touch upon on healthcare, given the pandemic, a bigger picture, and also like equity, sustainability, to make continuing making investment into the town and also schools. So I think everybody here is also touch upon the experiences and the talents. And I think this next question is directly related to this. What unique talents and experience or backgrounds make you suited for school committee or select board? And what have you already implemented and accomplished towards, for example, racial equity and equality, especially rules driving racial parity in public domain? So I will start this time. I'll start with Rebecca.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Dennis. And I'm going to try to be more succinct this time. In terms of my background, I alluded to a little bit my professional background. I work as an innovation strategist. My academic background is in behavioral economics and human decision making. So, I'm kind of a data nerd. I'm all about accountability and clarity. What I do kind of in my day-to-day job is try to invent new healthcare programs that are going to kind of break through all of the very deep problems that we have in trying to get affordable healthcare and mental health care to people. And to do that, it's all about having a strategy, building financial business cases, bringing a lot of different kinds of people together. And I think that's the kind of innovation expertise that can help us implement some of those programs and so forth that we were talking about. And with that data lens as well. And another thing that I'll highlight my children and my personal experience, not just for myself, but also for a lot of families that I've interacted with. And something that's a little bit unique for me is I have one child who is a fairly typical child, and my other child who's 10 is autistic, neurodiverse, gifted, non-binary, a very unique person. And we had a very difficult time, a traumatizing time, in fact, with the school system. And through that experience, I've met a lot of families who in some way had a difficult time having their needs met by our schools, and they may have left our schools. And I think it's really important that we consider all of our kids and how we can make sure that every kid can thrive in our schools, who may not, and how we can do that in a way, again, that we can fit into our budget, and that kind of makes sense. So that's, really made me very personally passionate around advocating for kids' needs, and also measuring outcomes of different interventions and behavioral interventions, and making sure that, we're getting all, we're getting where we want. On the racial equity work, I have had a really busy year that I'm really excited to share with you. I was a co-founder of Equal Justice Needham, which is a group that has done a lot of equity work in town. One thing we did was create a resolution at town meeting for the town to be anti-racist and look into education, policing, and housing from a racial equity lens. And despite this being opposed by town leadership, it was actually passed resoundingly, which was really exciting. Also at town meeting, I think Lakshmi may have said this, I was the person last June who stood up and asked why we were increasing our police funding and our weapons at a time where there were Black Lives Matter protests happening every day. And as a result of that action, that led to change in town. That was an impetus for the Nuari working group that Marcus is part of. So I think my ability to kind of stand up and ask the difficult questions is something that, connects with my comment around advocating for children. How do we do that? Where are we not succeeding that we need to get better? And then finally, that racial disparity policing report that Lakshmi mentioned was kind of a labor of love for a number of people, but definitely took like 5 months of my life. It's kind of a gift to the town around what are the facts and how do we look at those facts in an honest way so that we can understand where we want to get better.
Great. Thanks for all the hard work toward the racial parity. So Liz, do you want to start answering the question?
Great. So just in terms of my unique talents or my specific experience, I wear a couple different hats that give me unique perspectives on education generally and on the Needham school system particularly. I work at Leslie. I'm adjunct faculty, but I also supervise student teachers.
Everybody, if you can mute yourself, would be great.
Oh, great.
Okay,
There's nothing like hearing yourself, like your very own words echoed, over and over again. You're like, oh. So I supervise student teachers at Leslie as well. My field in teaching is early childhood specifically, but that means that I have spent a lot of time on the ground in classrooms, talking to teachers in other communities and student teachers in other communities and observing students. And so I have a really good sense of what education looks like, not only in Needham, but also in the greater Boston area. I also have done a lot of curriculum design and implementation, and that's primarily in STEM related fields because that's my area of passion when it comes to 21st century learning. And I happen to really, really, really adore educational policy. And I have some experience in educational policy at the local level with the work that I've done with Citizens for Needham Schools. I've watched a ton of school committee meetings. And then also I follow it at the state and federal level, including some work recently to try to get the COVID relief bill to include funding for early childhood, specifically early childhood centers, families, and children. Oh, and I should also mention that I went back to school and I got my doctorate because I wanted to deeply explore this relationship between families, schools, and communities, particularly as it relates to equity. And so for that reason, to answer the second half of the question, my work in looking at equity comes right out of my dissertation research. And so I work in helping communities or organizations put real equity at the center. So there's a sort of a performative equity that school systems or organizations have where they say they're going to do equity and they have a nice equity vision statement, but they don't actually change any of their systems. And so if you want that kind of change where you actually flip the system so that all voices can be heard, not just, as everyone has been discussing, the male white voice, which is what it often is. If you're going to flip the system, you have to take a different approach. You have to put a different sort of spin on the education, and you have to kind of reach out and bring people along with you. And that work has, I say consumed, but happily consumed my life in the last 2 years or so.
Thanks. I think it's important to keep all the financial work done correctly and to avoid the future hassle down the road. It's going to be a big problem if you want to correct it like a retroactive to correct anything in your history. Thanks, Liz. So Lakshmi?
Okay, so I have an MBA and a PhD, and I say
Wow.
that jokingly. Yeah, exactly. There was this ad a while ago by FedEx that when the person had the MBA, then you had to show them how to do it, right? So, but hopefully you'll forgive that part. But I do focus in entrepreneurship. And so my research, as I mentioned, is around the significant gender gap that exists in funding decisions. And women entrepreneurs receive less than 2% of all the private capital funding. And, you know, money is a big reason why businesses can grow and thrive. And so this is a problem. And one of the reasons, frankly, is that 96% of all investors are men, predominantly white men. And so, you know, there does need to be a shift, and you'll hear that as a theme, because what it comes down to is you need to have a seat at the table, you need to have representation. And so I've gotten involved. I sit on boards now. I'm on the board of a couple private companies, and I'm on the board of a national entrepreneurship organization. So I understand how boards work. And I understand what the process of, you know, being the role of a board member and being on a governing board and raising the issue of gender inequity, certainly in the investment and the policy space. And that's what I strive to do. But I will say to you, and I can say this, I feel very comfortably in this arena, is that, you know, I'm an Indian woman, and right, like obviously, but there are additional equity issues, frankly, for women who aren't white. And so I do strive to consider and raise those, you know, particularly by being in the room. You know, it's not just all women, it's, you know, women of color face unique equity issues. So, you know, and I got really inspired, as I mentioned, from the last town meeting, and met up with a lovely group of people. Also was one of the founders of Equal Justice in Needham to start thinking about racial equity issues. I worked with the Lived Experiences group in helping them put together their report to document the racism that is currently being experienced by our community members. You know, and I have made an effort to go to my kids' schools and, you know, bring Diwali celebrations to expose Diwali. I've brought Indian books and, you know, Indian cultural books to the library to try to integrate more, you know, Asian, frankly, you know, Indian culture into the classroom. But I have to also mention that, you know, I mentioned I was the only Indian girl in the school system when I was here growing up. But I was incredibly depressed by the vigil a few weeks ago, the anti-Asian, you know, hate vigil that was put together amazingly well by all the community groups in town. And it was a great event, but I was so depressed to hear the high school students talk about experiences that, frankly, I experienced growing up in this town. And it's really, you know, we need to make structural change, and it has to be intentional, and it has to be from the top down if we want our community to not have, you know, the sense that people of color or, you know, Asian community members are made to feel like they're not from here, or they're made to feel like they're the other. And we need to protect our people of color. And there can be a lot more intentional ways of doing that. And I would like to make that happen is really what I would like to say on that. So, you know, I think there's too much right now of what I consider to be acknowledgement but no action. And that, it can't continue.
I totally agree. Thank you very much. So, Marcus?
Absolutely. In the interest of time, I'll try to be a little bit quicker.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say I echo a lot of what Lakshmi ended with. Very, very, very valid points and a lot of reasons why I'm running as well. I think what unique talents and experience and background bring me or make me suited for this is all of my work and my professional work has been in communities. And when I think about the select board and as a governing body, it works for the community, to help the community, to bring about changes and listen to concerns and questions that will help bring our community forward. And, what I've been able to do in my work has just that. When it comes to collaborating with people, when it comes to hearing people where they come from, to listen to understand people and not listen to tell people what to do. I think that's something I've really excelled in. And I think that is something that's something that overall as a town government, we can do a better job in. And I feel like I can help bring that to town government. When I think about what I'm doing now, I talked about a little bit earlier, I was appointed to the new RE working group in the Human Rights Committee. And on March 22nd, and then it was later adopted by the select board on March 23rd, the new RE group created a vision statement, guiding principles and intentional practices that we gave to the select board for them to adopt, and then for us to in turn send it along to the other groups to adopt as well. When I think about a vision statement, you think about, is it where you want to be as a community? Is it aspirational as well as inspirational? And it describes an outcome that is meaningful, believable, and relevant. Is kind of what we have in our statement that we created. And the vision statement is Needham will be a community free of racism, racial bias, prejudice, and discrimination. Our residents, schools, businesses, organizations, and government will work together to identify barriers that racial equity to racial equity and create solutions, opportunities, resources, and support removing them. I think that is a strong vision statement. I think there's so much we can unpack from that, and being a part of this work to help create that and help put in something in motion that we're going to have the community to adapt and held responsible. So the select board is going to be responsible for holding the community accountable for these things. And I intend, once I'm on the board along with the other select board, is to really focus on how we need to measure this and how, what is done as far as accountability if this is not met. And it's something that I won't stand for. And I believe the select board, we will have that same notion. And I'm also I was appointed to the State Alliance for the YMCA's, their Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Steering Committee, where we are putting together practices, verbiage, and a language in order for all of the YMCA's of Massachusetts to adapt, to instill in the fabric and structure of their DNA and implement throughout their associations and branches. So I'm doing this work and I'm very excited for it. I think that was 3 minutes. So.
Yes, you still got 10 seconds left though. I have to run a timer now. All right, great. So thanks for everybody. I think every candidate has a unique background experience in the past and to contribute efforts to the future role if elected. And so the third question is from the pandemic in the past year, I think everybody felt the a dramatic change of lifestyle, work style, etc. And especially for kids and for their school lives, you probably have no time to take a break and not being stay with them, and also have to work overtime a lot. So please describe what you see as lessons learned from the pandemic as we move forward. And for select board candidates, please focus on the measures that town should take to help residents and business in recovery. And for school committee candidates, please focus on measures with regard to Needham Public Schools operation efficacy as we move forward. So this time I'll start with Lakshmi. Is that okay?
Sure. So great question. And I think, as an entrepreneurship professor, I'm always thinking about how crises can also lead to opportunities. And so there the pandemic has been extremely challenging, horrible, really big business impact on our lives, like you just mentioned, Dennis. But there have been a few things that I think are positive that we could learn from this. And one of them, kudos to the select board currently for making outdoor dining happen, right? Like that is kind of fun. And that's hopefully something we can continue. Unfortunately, they didn't extend learning what local businesses could use in addition to outdoor dining. So I think there are other services and needs that could have been met. Like I mentioned, my mother's business, like no one ever asked, what did she need? We should be asking. We should be gathering data to understand what needs we can help with. Like how can we invest in helping our local businesses, for example. And similarly, I think with our community, one of the positives of the pandemic has been Zoom meetings, right? Like being able to watch the planning board meetings or the finance committee meetings or the public hearings and being able to participate. I know personally, I've never been able to make one of these meetings because they all take place at night. I have young kids, like that either means, going alone, or past bedtime, or it's during bedtime, or hiring a babysitter, right? And we did that once for a hearing about the cable lines that were going to be in the neighborhood. So, we had to pay for a babysitter in order to go participate. And, I don't even know what was done with those communications. So I think part of the lessons is that, the openness and the being able to hear from a wider variety of community members than just the ones that can show up for these evening meetings is really critical. And the way we continue to think about disseminating information. And I think we could have done a better job, obviously, with testing and safety measures for our community. And now with even vaccine delivery, like there's just a lot of information gaps. And I know that has to do with the state level as well, but on a community level, I think we can do more. So I'll stop there.
Oh, thanks. Appreciate that. Okay, so for the same question for school committee candidates, Liz, do you want to start?
Yeah, I agree with Lakshmi that the pandemic has some lessons that are actually opportunities, or I consider them to be surprises, as well as areas to improve. So I'll start with like the opportunities. One of the things, especially since I've been in education for so long, that I found really surprising was how effective Zoom actually can be as a way to learn. And I just want to be clear, I'm not saying that we should all go to Zoom learning, because too much Zoom learning, I think, doesn't work for the majority of kids. But having been on the ground in classrooms watching, for example, Boston Public Schools, they were fully remote. I saw some absolutely engaging and amazing teaching on Zoom. So using Zoom as a tool, not to replace in-person learning, but for times of need, and especially knowing how to do it in a way that works for the age group, that was a big surprise for me and a huge positive. Also, the transparency that Zoom offered in terms of school committee meetings, so that people actually really could follow what was happening in local educational policy, was amazing. But there's a flip side to that, and that's an area to improve. That even though we had that transparency and we have this heightened interest in education and how it works, I think we need more information. People are clamoring for more sort of systems level, how does education work and why does it work the way it does? And that's like incredibly complicated. I personally find it very, very interesting. And it's also not really something that you would expect. So it's very sort of surprising the way that education works or does not work. So in terms of areas for improvement, the transparency with the greater community of what was happening and why it was happening, right? For example, in the summer, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education was changing their mandates, and mandates you school systems have to follow. They changed them like every 3 days, and all the school systems across the Commonwealth were just playing catch up. So under those circumstances, I think the school system now could think about, when we have an emergency situation like this, how do we pivot so that we're not entirely dependent on what the state says? Now, I don't really have any good answers for that, Well, I have some ideas, and I won't go into them right now because I'm running out of time. But that was something like better remote learning and different styles, more 21st century styles of learning were two lessons I think that could be applied in the future. All right, and I will stop there. Done.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. Rebecca?
Yeah, so I'll be short because I mostly echo what everyone else was saying about transparency and access through Zoom, and then also Liz's point around Zoom as an educational tool. I went to MIT at a place called the Media Lab, which is a very technology like futurism driven kind of lab. And not that we need to have robots walking around our schools or anything, but I do think that there are a lot of amazing tools and educational models that can facilitate using technology for more of a personalization, meeting kids where they are in terms of the curriculum or other types of specific needs that can help us undergo an evolution. And I was thinking the other day how it's kind of analogous to what's happening in healthcare right now, which is that telemedicine. We tried, like the healthcare industry, for many years to get telemedicine to take off, and it just didn't. And it was frustrating. And now all of a sudden overnight, there's like 2,000% increase in telemedicine, and it's also spawning this like Cambrian explosion, or whatever what I'm trying to say, right? Evolution of all types of new primary care and behavioral health models of care that meet someone where they are and let someone engage the way they want to. And it's not a perfect analogy, but how do we use everything that we've had to do throughout the pandemic to help us understand what do we want to keep and what do we want to evolve, and how do we not just go back to a status quo that was like working, but it wasn't working perfectly, right? So how do we keep some of those things and move forward with it? Both in an academic way, in a mental health way, in a lifestyle kind of way. I think there's a lot of lessons that we'll be absorbing for a little while.
Great. Definitely, this is a very good recap, and I think especially my feelings from school operations is it's basically echoing what Liz and Rebecca have been mentioning about. I think going forward, definitely technology savvy, and need to be able to adapt it to new styles of operation and to make sure the operation is in compliance together with efficiency. That's a very challenging question to address. Definitely technology will help in that regard. And I think overall the school system has been picking up very quickly on technology related in terms of setting up with the Google Classroom, etc. And to like Zoom sessions available for hybrid classes and different options for kids. That's a great. Thank you all. And so this
Can I answer now? I didn't get a chance to go, Dennis.
Sure. Oh, sorry about that.
It's
I always
okay.
thought that you were the first one to go through. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, you had Lakshmi, and then I was like, I wasn't gonna make a big deal.
You're right. Okay.
It's all right.
Okay. My bad.
It's okay. No worries.
Lakshmi, I should go through you first. Please remind me if I made that mistake.
I'm very patient. I'm a patient man, so don't even worry.
Sure. Go ahead.
So everyone kind of hit on the things I was going to talk about, especially when it comes to Zoom and rethinking the way that we do things and make it more accessible and wanting people to be more involved in town government. I think just peeling it back and see, the way that we've done things that led us to a point where we feel like, that we should be running to help bring about a change. So obviously the status quo and how it's always been done has not worked. And I feel like all of us have a similar goal as far as, when you come to Zoom or you think about Zoom fatigue, you think about it also gives people to be anywhere in the world, to be able to participate, whether it's in classrooms, whether it's in town government, and things of that nature. And then the second part of the question is when I think about businesses and residents, something that I think it was on the 12th of March, the emergency funding from the American Rescue Plan. And basically what that does is the funds may be used to replace revenue loss or reduce as a result of the pandemic fund COVID-related costs, provide support and aid to households, businesses that were impacted by the crisis. As far as economic recovery renewal, investments in water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. And the funds are going to come in 2 blocks to Needham, and one's going to be in 2021 and the other one's going to be in 2022. I believe it'll be close to the end of the year, but I'm not sure. And then we have until about 2024 to use the funds. And right now, Needham's supposed to get an estimated, I think $3 million are supposed to get from that. So that's not money we have to pay back or anything like that. When I think about how we can use some of it, I think about this past year, I know there was a 50% reduction on alcohol license renewal for restaurants and retails. And I know at the end of this year for 2022, it's going to be renewed in December. So I think I know small businesses aren't just restaurants, but also retail. So I think about giving a 1-year fee abatement until the following year, I think will help on the restaurant or the restaurant side, help maintain the meal tax revenue. Because, the full service restaurants and establishments have been hit the hardest and are going to be the hardest to recover. And when you think about making it a small investment right now in our fees in order to protect and grow our tax revenue, I think that's important. So, looking out for small businesses. And I know there's other ways, especially talking with the select board, and how we can better achieve that and use that money that is going to be given to us. And then, like Rebecca talks about, being within a budget, looking at the budget and making sure that we're doing all that we can to help our businesses and our households and our people not only survive this pandemic, but thrive coming out of it.
Great, thanks very much. I do echo with the big hit for the small business, especially the restaurant and other service industry in general in the town. They take a big hit, and definitely the emergency funding will be very helpful to help them to go through, but it still take a lot to get a recover to where they were before the pandemic, because of the life change and all the different changes around the families in the town. Okay, great. Thank you very much. I think this is I have one more general question, so which is at the end of the session tonight. And now I will probably go through the questions for separate questions for school committee and also select board. Before doing that, I saw there's some messages in the chat box regarding about other candidates, and I just want to repeat the disclaimer. Maybe they joined late, and so CFN has no endorsement of any candidates for town select board or school committee. And for candidates who cannot join this event tonight, we do provide the same pre-screening questions for them to provide written answers. I already received the right answers in writing from Michael O'Brien, who's also a candidate for the school committee, and also the answers from Mr. Maurice Handel. And I will share that with the CFN community together with the API group. Thanks for mentioning that. And one more thing, so this video will be recorded, and I will be published on the Facebook page and YouTube channel of CFN. So feel free to follow us and to interact on social media. Thanks. So now I'm going to move to the next question. So the first one is a question for school committee candidates. So what are the major budget and investment for public schools in next 3 to 5 years? What do you think are the proper next steps for the town in terms of school facilities, including renovations, additions, and new buildings? Can I start with Liz this time?
Okay, Dennis, I'm going to need you to time me on this because I really geek out on the school rebuilding stuff. So you got to stop me when it's time. All right.
Okay. I do have a paper with the time on it.
Okay. I might need it on this one. All right. So the first part of the question is, what is sort of the major budget, looking like? And as I said before, I think that we need to kind of hold aside this idea that COVID may require more budget bandwidth from the Needham Public Schools. We don't necessarily know exactly what that might be. There's a good chance there'll be some sort of a surprise that we weren't able to anticipate. So I would like to be wrong about this, but I think that we need to keep that in mind as we go forward with the school budget over the course of the next year. So beyond that, the major school budget item is rebuilding. And I was in the process of the rebuilding of Hillside. I followed that because my oldest girls, who are now in high school and college, were in Hillside when that process started. And so I followed it very closely. And my opinion is that we need to move these school buildings forward. And I know you're going to share all of our written responses. So I put in my response a whole bunch of links to various things that people might find interesting. All right, so I believe we need to move forward with these projects, but when it comes to school rebuilding in Needham, we have this sort of chicken egg problem. This is like this sort of circular dilemma because our town is experiencing pretty robust growth, right? I looked it up and we've had 9% growth in population over the last 10 years. And so what happens when you have sort of that rate of growth is that it impacts your infrastructure, including your schools. And so for that reason, our middle schools right now are actually overcrowded. So in response to this, we do have regular ongoing population projections that are presented, I think it's yearly, to the school committee, which is like another favorite school committee meeting of mine. And the problem is that over the last like 10 years, or in the time that I've been following school committee meetings, they have consistently been predicting that Needham's school age population would plateau, but it didn't, it hasn't. We now have a professional doing this work, and this professional group also says that at around 2026, Needham's population will plateau and then come down a little bit to what it is right now. So we do need the extra space. If we're going to have over the next, say, 5 decades, a school population of this size, we do need some more space. So I support that building, but I believe we have to do the building projects sort of in line with the other town policies, especially those that impact growth, so that we can make sure that the town policies don't promote growth to where we outgrow our infrastructure. Beyond that, I would just point people who are interested, if you're like me, to the master facilities plans. There was one in 2006, one in 2014. I put the link in the document. You can listen to, or you can read all of the cost projections and the, okay, that's it. But okay, if you like cost projections.
I mean, because I think Liz provided a lot of background information about school system. I think if you want to have 30 seconds or 1 minute more, that's fine. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. I wrote it all down. Anybody who's actually interested, like I am in this stuff, you can find it in what I wrote. And so thank you for listening to me go on and on about school rebuilding.
Okay, if you have, I just want to give you a chance to wrap up what you just said. So if you have to summarize what you are trying to do for the future investment, what's your key takeaway?
Okay, key takeaway is that these processes take a lot of time, a lot of background planning, like a decade's worth of background planning goes into schools. But if we get this done right now and the population projections are correct, then we shouldn't have to do more investment in our schools for a few decades.
I see, thanks. All right, so Rebecca.
Yeah. Oh man, Liz, you're kind of hard to follow when it comes to school building infrastructure. But I will just say that, you know, I know there's a lot of great work that's already, you know, consultants and so forth that's already been put into these buildings. It does need to be, we have these short-term needs, and then we also need to be doing some long-term planning and not kind of kicking the can down the road. This may have happened a little bit, you know, potentially in the past. So I do think those are definitely, I mean, without, you know, hands down, Dennis, one of the number one issues that we're going to face budget-wise for our schools. And yeah, also Liz, you know, we can't forget about COVID. It's sort of the obvious thing to say, but, you know, but it's true. In addition to physical safety, infrastructure, space kinds of issues, there's also supporting our teachers. I know they're already starting to get vaccinated, but making sure that we ensure that they have, vacation time, at a moment's notice when they get a vaccine appointment. Are we going to look at vaccination clinics at some point down the road into the fall and winter when children's vaccinations are going to be available? How are we going to think about that? Are we going to have pediatric clinics at schools, perhaps? I mean, just, and thinking about all those kinds of elements are going to be really important. And then I think just kind of hearkening back to what I was saying before about looking at the fundamentals of how we operate, what our visions are, things like the equity audit, or things like this, there was a portrait of a Needham graduate report, all these visions that we have. What is our path to that vision? Is our spending in line with seeing the line of sight to achieving that vision? And if not, why is that? And how do we kind of look at those fundamentals on programs, on pieces of the budget that are increasing, like special education, and that kind of budget effectiveness in service of innovation and new programs that I was mentioning earlier.
So yeah, I think from other sessions, I also learned like $2 out of 3 from the town revenue. So basically, is goes to school system expense. As Liz mentioned, if the size of students population continue to grow, right? So we might running out of space or facilities for especially like a high school education, for example, right? So I mean, I just want to see your reflection. Do you know what the school committee right now in terms of to finding other places to expand the space or continue to do renovation on the current school? Any idea or input here? Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, in my responses, I put a link to the current master plan, and that'll give you a sense if you're not already familiar with what they're planning. They're looking at redoing Pollard and Mitchell, and then returning High Rock into an elementary school. So if the population projections are correct, that will have this bump, and then we'll come back down to where we are now, which is approximately 5,000 students in the district. And if that's the case, and we do those buildings, then we should not need any other spaces. I mean, there's always this question mark, though, of you can't really project what's going to happen, right?
Sure. Thanks for the input. Okay. So now I'm going to move on to a separate question for select board candidate. So the question is, do you think the town government should do more to diversify the housing stock in Needham so that living in Needham is possible for all social economic groups? If so, what steps should the town and the select board take? Please relate to your thoughts on the community engagement with respect to, for example, 40B apartments development on the Great Plain Avenue or any future work plan for Muzzy dealership area. So this time, can we start with the Marcus?
Thank you, Dennis.
Yeah.
So when I think about the housing stock and making it affordable for all people to live here, I think that's something that we should most definitely look at. That's something that is not going to be just on the select board, but it's going to be a lot of other committees in collaboration that we have to work with in order to make that a possibility. Everyone from the zoning to planning to FinCom, to all these different people that are going to play a part in making that a reality. And I think about myself, I live in Needham. It's not easy to afford living in Needham, but it's a place that I've been able to call home for a little while now and been able to work and grow and feel like it is a place that, like I said, I can call home, and my neighbors and people that I've learned to know and learned to love in this town has made me want to be here and be here for, an extended period of time. I think about, 40B apartments. I think about the threshold of the 10% of affordable housing or there. So what the floor is. And I think right now we're at like 12.5%, but I feel like even raising it to a little bit higher to make sure that we are doing our best to encourage, developers or people is the best that we can to say that, we want to make this accessible. We want people to be able to come here, to be able to feel like they belong, and, not necessarily just be on the outskirts of town, to try to do something with, as far as, zoning, if it were to happen. So people that are coming in are able to be, closer to the center of town and in other places. And I think that's really important. When I think about the Muzzy dealership, I think, there's a couple different options that I know that can go there. I think there's a finance committee tonight, which I don't know the results of kind of how that went and what happened there, but there's still a little bit more that we can do to kind of downscale just a slight bit more. But I think there's opportunities to do, commercial things there, nothing like warehouses or anything like that, or something that's enormous and that's an eyesore, but being very intentional about adding green space, adding, commercial, maybe a community center or something that is there that the town is going to be proud of. But I don't want to do anything without continuing to have town input, continue to have voices at the table that are giving, feedback to the people that are helping to plan and do these things. So I think it is such a town and community effort. It has to be. And I feel like that's what a part of being on the select board is being not only a voice, a governing body, but you have to be a voice of the people. You have to be a voice that listens to understand, that listens to put thought into what we're doing and continue to go back to that. And there's a chance we're not going to make everyone happy. We make the majority of the town happy. I think that's important. And I think that we just do it and we lead with empathy and we lead with, like you were to be dealing with your family, so, people that you care about, and that I think you put that much effort into the way that you govern a town. I think that's going to be really important. So that's where I stand on it.
Thank you. Lakshmi?
Dennis, this is such a great question, because I mean, I am a firm believer in that we need more housing. We need more housing, period. We need more diverse housing, and we certainly need more affordable housing. A starter home in Needham is, what, $800,000, almost $1 million. And like, I went through this personally with my parents. As our population gets older, where are our parents going to go? And so we ended up, because the accessory dwelling unit law was finally passed, where you can have a unit on your house, we're actually going to do that for my own parents, because honestly, where could we afford to have them live nearby is a real problem. And I think not having the diversity of housing options available is a big problem for our community. And if we really value, diversity, equity, inclusion, like all of these things that we're talking about, I mean, this has to be a priority. And I think it also, the kind of the arguments against are often, the term straw man, like they're unfounded. And I think it really highlights the way our town has been working, because the select board doesn't actually control, right, the zoning changes. That's the planning board. They can influence and they can advise, but the planning board is the one that has the authority to drive zoning changes. But that doesn't mean that a developer is going to come in. So even if you open up the zoning, and you say, oh, we want to have affordable housing, like, unless you have the mandate there, it doesn't have to happen, in other words. And so I think part of the issue is that all of these things seem to happen behind closed doors, and people have these discussions without a lot of community input, and frankly, without of long-term planning or vision. And Liz just mentioned, we don't know what the numbers will look like, but we can do some good estimates and some good forecasting. And we can also bring in our neighbors, meaning like the highway authority, the state agencies. There's a lot, Marcus mentioned the infrastructure bill that's coming. There's a lot of funding opportunities that if we're creative, we could, and if we are thinking longer term, that we can start tapping into. And it feels like everything happens last minute. And I think that's because so much of the conversation is done without transparency and community involvement. And so I would hope to change that moving forward.
Thank you very much for the input. I do think, yeah, it's it's great for residents in Needham. It's great to see how the price of the housing goes up every year. But on the other side, it's like going up too fast and make Needham not make it harder for a diversified community to live in. And to have a diversified culture too. So in that regards, I think definitely we need a more affordable housing in the Needham, but definitely requires some more future planning to make a more efficient use of the valuable land available in Needham. Thanks for all the perspectives. So one more, and then next question is for school committee candidates. So the district is in the process of implementing racial literacy curriculum at our elementary school K-5 in support of the broader equity improvement initiative. However, middle school and high school education is still concentrated on Eurocentric textbooks that do not include the experience of minorities. So what can the school committee do to push for meaningful curriculum change to include immigration history, ethics studies, and incorporation of critical pedagogy to drive a culture competence of all students? Also, diversified teacher and staff will provide more opportunities for education and interaction among diverse students. What do we do to promote diversity hiring in our school district? This is a very long question, but I think this is a very important question given the bigger picture right now. Relating to stop Asian hate, and also the inspiring speech from the high schoolers at the vigil 1 week ago in Needham. So Rebecca, do you want to start first?
Sure thing. Yeah, one thing that I touched upon in my written answer was the hiring piece, which I have experience with in a corporate setting, and this whole question of diversity and hiring, is a big topic, not just in a school setting, but in a lot of environments. And I think the key thing is that it really is doable if you put in the effort to do it for an organization, which often does take a little bit more work to find qualified candidates who don't necessarily think of applying to your organization on their own. And so, I am not familiar with our current hiring practices. I am familiar with the low rates that we currently do have of diverse teachers and staff. And I have heard our superintendent talk about a desire to change that situation. So I would be interested in helping to bring best practices from the business world and academics on, how we might want to look at our hiring practices. And similarly with the curriculum question, as a school committee member, it's not like I would have direct, control over the details of the curriculum, but I do think it comes down to those same questions we've talked about, of asking those questions about, what is our vision and what are our steps toward meeting that vision, and the types of things those high schoolers brought up around history, anti-racism, the earliest years. And if we aren't moving at the speed that we think we should be moving, again, what are the barriers to that? Is it a budget issue? Is it a materials issue? Or is it somehow kind of a motivation issue, training, professional development, just kind of figuring out what are the pieces that are preventing it, so that we can figure out, for again, what we do have more control over in terms of, budget and high level policy and so forth, how we can facilitate that kind of work that everybody does want to do, but, why isn't it happening and how do we push it forward?
Okay, great, thanks. Liz?
So I'll just start by saying that I've been serving on the REAL Coalition in the Needham Public Schools now since 2019. I can never remember the acronym, race, equity, something in leadership. At any rate, I'm a parent advisory member. And so I'm not sort of on the inner circle, but I do get to attend some of the meetings and to hear about what the district is doing specifically with regards to these issues that are raised in this question. And I put the links to both the curriculum piece and the hiring piece in my written document. I'll just say that they have revamped their hiring, and they have identified places where they can hire staff of color, and they're in the process of trying to do so. So it is happening. Is it happening as quickly as we would like? Probably not. The same process is going through, they're going through the same process with the curriculum and with the English reading books, right? So that's sort of the basic level of what's happening now. And now I want to just mention one other thing about the hiring, that it's not just about bringing staff on. School systems in general tend to be very white, and especially in elementary and middle school, they tend to be predominantly female. You also have to create a hospitable environment for faculty to come in, and that is not always easy. So it's sort of a two-part thing, because you also want to retain folks. Now I'm going to talk a little bit from my own personal experiences. So my husband is Chinese American. My kids are biracial. And some of you may have read on my professional blog, I write a lot about these issues just generally. And I interviewed my daughter after the Atlanta shooting. So my daughter Abby is a 10th grader at the high school currently. She's also very aware of and interested in systemic issues. As a biracial student, she struggles with how she appears to her peers, right? And that has become a huge issue for her in the wake of the Atlanta shooting. She also talks a lot about microaggressions and other forms of discrimination that she either has experienced herself or has witnessed among other friends, not just other friends who are Asian or friends who are biracial, but friends generally. And so I know from that. I also know, because my research shows the same thing. I've read the equity audit. I have followed the lived experiences project. I know that our students of color in Needham Public Schools don't see themselves represented. They don't see themselves in their peers, in their teachers, in their curriculum. And that's a serious problem. And I believe that it needs to change. I believe that Needham is making a good faith effort to changing it. I would like to be a part of moving that change forward as quickly as possible. And I just want to say, the reason to do this is because it's the right thing to do. It's the ethical thing to do. And I'll also just say it is the right thing to do for everybody. It's not just the right thing to do for my child who's biracial. Building an inclusive, tolerant, representative curriculum and school system is best for all children, period, end of story. And so I bring my background and my educational equity work to bear on that. Anyone who's interested in more concrete ideas, I'm always happy to talk about that, but I am once again running out of time.
Thank you, Liz. Yes, I think, this question is very long. It's actually it's two questions, packaged as one. It's a very hard question to answer them each even by themselves. So now I'm going to move on to the last question, separate question for select board candidates. So if the town could afford to add one new position to the operating budget, what, in your opinion, should that position be? Or should that funds to be spent elsewhere? Please explain your thoughts and plan. Thanks. So Lakshmi, start.
Okay, so I think first and foremost, we need to do a better understanding of our budget. So, an audit essentially of where we're spending money, because it's unclear to me personally, even being on town meeting, and it feels like we have a whole lot of waste, particularly as I mentioned, we spent just recently, $77 million on a new police building. I mean, this is an enormous investment and new appropriations for police funding that makes you wonder, like, what are we not funding? And things like historical preservation analysis and consulting fees and so on. So I say that in the spirit of, yes, we could definitely spend money on a new position, but we could also take from other priorities or reprioritize. And one thing I've already hired, Marcus mentioned this earlier, the social media person, and there has been no upgrades to our technology. I think we could definitely do some technological improvement. But the other thing that I personally, and this is where I started my interest in running for government, is the need, frankly, for bathrooms at the playgrounds. And I say that like kind of jokingly, but not, because hygiene and infrastructure for our children are seriously lacking. If you take your kids to the playground now, what do you do if you have to go to the bathroom, right? You drag them to Walgreens or you have to run home. And this is a real concern as we think about our town and the services that we offer. So I would seriously want to invest in building bathrooms. Thanks.
Thank you. I share the same concerns about the restrooms near the playground. Every time there's my kids have to, I just have to borrow the restroom at a YMCA. Yeah. Okay. So Marcus.
Yeah, so at the Y, we've had many people come in from Greensfield to use the bathroom. So that is definitely
Thank you for that.
Is absolutely true. So when I think about that, I know we talked about there is someone, a communications person that they hired, and I know that they were strapped with COVID and things like that. But hopefully we're moving towards really revamping that process, the website, and honing in on what that could and should be in order to increase town engagement. So I think that position is extremely important in the fact that, as we hopefully pivot through this and away from the pandemic, hopefully things work out that way, that person can really focus on how we're engaging our community, how we're really telling people about what we do in this town, how to come to forums, how to come to, town halls, how to be a part of voting, how to get your name on a ballot, how to drum up interest from the town. Because right now, I feel like this is one of the elections in the last, I don't know how many years, that has gotten so much buzz and has brought a new excitement to this town. So I think we should feed off this election, in the coming weeks and feed off that and continue that momentum into really pushing forward, so we don't have people lose their interest in town government. So we have people wanting to ask more questions, to want to get involved. I think that is really important. So I think that position, as it shifts, it should be really intentional. And I would love to work with, the communications director and the select board and other people that will do a real pivot as we would need to, and that we talked about so many times before, I think, in this conversation. There's not going to be a lot of community input if we're not engaging the community in one centralized location, in one, space where we can really highlight the things we're doing well. And also think about, when there's complaints or something like that, what's the process? When you want to apply for a board position that is not appointed, what is the process? One centralized location on one page or an app or something that we can really do to hone in on, having this community feel like it's a community and that the voices are heard.
Thank you, Marcus. Appreciate the perspective on this. Okay, so now we have the final question for everybody. So it's a general open-ended question. And if selected as a member of a select board or school committee, how would you encourage resident participation in town or school government matters in general? So I don't know. Who's volunteer to start first? Okay, go. Liz?
So I love this question because this is what my research is on, right? I am fascinated by the interplay between schools, families, and the greater community. And central to that is, how do people communicate across these boundaries? What are the barriers to communication, and how can you bring people together across these boundaries? And I feel that once you can get buy-in across these groups, then you can actually have a stronger school system. I'm just going to flip back to look at my notes for a second. You know, one of the things, though, about this kind of about bringing people in is that when you're in any community, but I think I see this a lot in Needham, you have this sort of imbalance in power or imbalance in what I call like voice. You have some parents and some groups who are really loud, and they don't have any difficulty having their particular point of view heard. On the other hand, you also have groups who really struggle to have their ideas, their educational ideas, heard by the school system. And I feel like one of my jobs, if I were elected to the school committee, would be to be aware of whose input we are getting, and to, of course, accept that and try to understand it, but also to be aware of who has not been heard. And then it would be my job to figure out, how can I find out what the perspectives are of these folks who have a harder time breaking into the conversation around education? Because we can't have everything that we've been discussing, transparency, equity, we can't have those things until we have the voices represented from every corner of our community.
Thank you, Liz.
Okay.
Becca?
Yeah. Liz, I really feel your point about, we can't put the onus on other people coming to us. That's not how it should work, right? It's our responsibility to do that kind of outreach and create those kinds of active kind of work to understand where people are and what's going on. And I really do think that that is very important. And that's kind of a design question, is how do we set up our meetings and our structures and our decision-making process to have these kinds of checks and questions so that it isn't kind of an ad hoc thing. And I also am just so heartened by all of the civic engagement that's been happening over the last year, partly because of the Zoom increased access in people attending all these different sorts of meetings. So I think it's very important that we figure out how to continue that. I think that's very critical. But that engagement is at all different levels. I was really happy to run a couple of events helping people learn how to run for town meeting, for example, which is actually a fairly good ratio of kind of effort to impact, was kind of my pitch that I was making for people. So I think the more we can help people understand and educate, Lakshmi was talking about this earlier, how does our government work and how are decisions made? I will admit, the first bunch of years I lived here, I had no clue that there was such a thing as town meeting or a town election. And people are busy, right? Like a lot of people might have jobs and kids, and they don't really have the time to come to us, and it's our responsibility to figure out how to go to them.
Okay, thank you. Marcus,
I was gonna say that I think I just answered this question with my last response. I kind of went over all of this, so I don't want to sound like I don't want to say the same exact thing, but I echo what everybody else said. And I'm going to let Lakshmi go just because I feel like I just answered all of this. So I don't want to repeat myself again, but I think it's just extremely important to make it as accessible as possible for people to get involved and stay involved.
Sure, thank you.
That was great. Thanks for that.
I was talking about music, right? I think this is such a lovely question, Dennis, because this is partially what I think inspired me. Another reason why I wanted to get engaged was the fact that getting involved seemed like such a a challenge. It was so hard for me when I had a town situation. My sidewalk needed repairing because my mother-in-law was in a walker and couldn't get to the door, and the sidewalk was all broken up. And I could not figure out how to have the town help me, right, to solve this problem. And it was such a black box. And so I think one of the things you've been hearing tonight is the transparency issues. And I think that partially has been preventing people from being able to be engaged. So, you know, who do you contact? You can't even find emails, you can't find contact information. And so that is kind of the first hurdle. And you know, just as Rebecca mentioned, you know, we've been trying to do town, you know, what does it mean to be a town meeting member? What is it to educate how the civics, the local civics, right, the local governance works, is really unknown by most of our community members. And so, and then when you try to reach out, or when you try to, you know, do some input, I feel like you're often turned away, or because they have their own people that they talk to. So I really hope that this year and all of our candidacies will kind of keep this momentum going, and that more people will want to run for office and will want to run for select board, school committee, you name it. There's lots of positions in town, and to get more engagement and more involvement from, you know, all of you, I think is really critical. You know, and I kind of shout it from the rooftops, you know, I'm like, if you like what I'm doing, like, you should run next year, right? Like, you should run. So, and this all, you know, you can read the book. There was a woman who worked on the social media campaign for Hillary Clinton, and she had this great line for women, you know, don't just march, run for something, right? Like, do it. So I hope all of you will consider getting more involved, and that we can create more open doors for our community to have input.
Thanks for all the inputs. And actually, from a past year working with the CFN and also with the other organizations in Needham in general, for example, like Needham Diversity Initiative, I felt like the community is very united in terms of addressing some of the concerns or questions, like to share the burden. And here, on behalf of the community, of CFN community, we have a lot of volunteers that would like to offer time and to promote culture, Asian culture, or promote history, like Asian histories, into to the kids, students, if needed. So I noticed that time has passed fast. This is a very, very nice session. We have more than 100 people listed down in and listen to a session asking questions. And I thought there's a couple of good questions in the chat box. So I will leave that to the candidates afterwards to maybe writing something to address answers, since it's being after 9 already. Thank you all, first of all, to join us tonight with all the CFN group and AAPI group. And also, this video will be shared afterwards on YouTube CFN page and a Facebook page. Feel free to share that with your friends in Needham or around surroundings, and to help them to know the perspective of our candidates. And also want to let everybody know that absentee ballot option is available for the town election, and the deadline, I believe, is April 7th. Okay, it's very simple. Download the form, fill it out, send it to the town clerk. I believe it's Teton, and then you will get the ballot in mail, and you can drop it by or before April 13th, and to send in your vote. Okay, so this is a time where I think we can unite it together as a community, and to make the next few years and better for Needham together. So thank you very much. I think Rebecca just sent in the application link for the vote by mail options. So that's great. And I will share that with the CFN group later on in the chat group too. So thank you very much for joining us tonight, and I'm sure we're going to work together here and there on different matters related to Needham, to make Needham a better town to live together. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us. Everyone have
Sure.
a great night.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you
Bye.
so much.
Bye
Thank
now.
you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.